James Hamburg of Mesa, Arizona passed away in 2000, and that's why it was especially unusual when he was caught by a red light traffic camera on October 10th, 2005. Some reporters treated the incident as a joke, but it seems something very unusual happened that day. A car ran a red light and was clearly caught by the traffic camera system. The Mesa Police Department issued a ticket to the perpetrator, James Hamburg, with a picture of the car that was used in the crime. The only problem was that James Hamburg had been deceased since 2000. The Hamburg family was ticketed, and it turns out that the driver being deceased was not the only problem with the photo. It shows both James Hamburg and his wife Lorraine in the vehicle. However, Lorraine was 80 years old at the time and was at home recovering from a heart surgery. When Lorraine saw the ticket, she frantically called her son Stephen, a retired firefighter. She said, "I don't know if this is some cruel joke or what," before receiving the surprising news that Stephen's wife was driving the car on October 10th. So the family was sure of the location of Lorraine, James, and the car. So the photo would be completely impossible. Stephen Hamburg explained the situation to Detective Terry Dorn, but she refused to let go of the anonymity. She asked him to provide conclusive evidence that his father had passed. So Stephen faxed the detective the certificate saying he had passed, but apparently never heard back. Presumably confused and frustrated, Stephen later contacted the press, and when the press spoke to the police again, the sergeant claimed Terry had never received the certificate Stephen had faxed. Finally, the police dug and discovered that James Hamburg was indeed deceased. Could it be that the photo with the ticket was 5 years old? That would definitely mean that the Mesa traffic cameras are seriously flawed and would probably explain the image of a deceased man being produced 5 years after he passed away. However, the building in the background of the photo was not built at the time that James passed away, and its building certificate was issued in November 2004 when James was definitely deceased. And the Mesa Department of Transportation destroys archived tickets after 3 years. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that the car was driven through the light on October 10th. The only question is who was driving the vehicle. The police sergeant told the press he thinks that someone else must have driven Mrs. Hamburg, and that someone may have had a suspicious resemblance to her deceased husband. However, it also seems unlikely because Lorraine Hamburg had just had heart surgery at the time and certainly could not go out in a car. Certainly not with strange men, although her daughter-in-law was using the car all day, so Lorraine couldn't have been in the car if she was healthy. James does not have a twin. Who was driving that car? Was it a vision from the past, a ghost and a doppelganger, a glitch in the Matrix? A 14 Times forum user, Skeptical X, shared a strange experience he had with his cousin Tony in the summer of 1973. He was 18 at the time. He and Tony were out late on a Friday night in Orkin, Ohio, and decided to go shopping for a 6-pack of beer to sit on the steps of a nearby elementary school with and quench their teenage summer thirst. They hadn't been there very long when they heard the rumble of a very loud car approaching them. When the vehicle came into view, they saw it was a 1959 Cadillac convertible traveling at a top speed of about 10 miles per hour. The reason it made so much noise was because it had no muffler. The witness and his cousin watched it pass them, wondering why such an unusual old car was driving around the neighborhood after midnight. Eventually, the car disappeared up the street, and the boys put it out of their mind. After a while, they got tired of sitting, so they went down the school steps and decided to go for a walk. They went around the side of the school and ended up on a dark side street with no streetlights and a few houses. They had not made much progress on their way when they then heard the ominous sound of the engine of the strange car. A pair of headlights could be seen about a quarter of a mile down the street. They froze in shock. The side of the street they were walking was wooded, so they slowly moved back to the tree line and waited. The car approached them, and as it slowly passed by, they saw that there were 3 people in it. There was a man driving, a woman in the passenger seat, and a little boy in the back seats. Although the street was dark, their faces were illuminated by the glow of the dashboard lights. None of the people in the car moved while the witnesses saw them. They said nothing, never moved their heads, or changed their facial expression. Skeptical X claimed they definitely looked like mannequins. The Cadillac disappeared on the street and they never saw again. Being teenagers out late, they messed around a bit and decided they had enough for the night, deciding they were ready to go home. As they walked around the block, a police car pulled up, stopped them, and the police asked them what they were doing out so late. They relaxed and opened up to him when he asked them if they had seen anything unusual that night. Of course, they spilled their whole story here. He calmly explained that there was a family of bike thieves in the car. Somewhat relieved, they continued home. Skeptical X eventually had the thought it was terribly convenient. The officer pulled up when he did, offering a perfectly reasonable explanation for what would otherwise be a very questionable experience. You have to wonder what kind of parent would take their kid out at night to steal, while there are apparently some pretty dysfunctional families in the area. He says it seemed just too weird. There were no bikes in the car either. Although another commenter later explained that the trunk of the car could fit 1 or 2, he still remembers how horrifying it was to see those motionless people drive down the dark street. If they were looking for a bike, wouldn't they look in the front yards instead of just looking straight ahead on a dark and lonely road? A commenter suggests that it sounds like a Men in Black encounter, entities that are just trying to appear human but not quite succeeding, or perhaps a thief's way of not trying to look suspicious. In 2003, the Asia-German Sports Exchange Program, who organizes sports events and international exchanges between Sri Lankan and European sports teams, was called by only a few weeks to prepare the Sri Lankan players for the tournament. Practices were held a few times a week where the players learned the basics. None of them had handball experience, but no skill was required. They just have to look like they know what they're doing. 28-year-old Chandana first heard of the system in 2002 from his older brother, who was already living in Italy. His brother promised to pay the expenses of bringing Chandana to Italy. When Chandana found a job, he had to repay his brother. Now he just had to learn handball. Chandana had never played handball before, but he played volleyball in high school, so it didn't take long to learn the basics. In 2 30-minute halves, a player can run 3 steps holding the ball and score goals. That was all Chandala could remember. I played this game in high school PE. No one ever threw the ball to me. I just walked around the field. All the athletic boys in class would just pass to each other and exclude everyone else. I love games like Foursquare, kickball, and badminton where no one needs to pass a ball to you to participate. I miss playing these games. I'm not aware of any place I can go as an adult and find a group of people to play with, though. During the match, the German handball team beat the host team 36-2. Despite the dismal performance, German officials invited the Sri Lankan team to Germany for a handball tournament there. That's how sports should be. It's not about winning, it's about having fun. A few weeks later, the 23-member Sri Lankan team arrived in the southern Germany town of Witzlagen in the afternoon before the start of the tournament. The group went sightseeing, then they met the mayor, took pictures, and had dinner with their German colleagues. They sang and danced and had fun. The team was beaten again in the first game. This time the Sri Lankans did not get any points. The evening, the Germans hosted the Sri Lankans for another dinner, and again the evening was spent singing and celebrating. One player said, "We had a very great time in this place. I felt a bit sorry as we all planned to go the next day very early in the morning." The next day, the entire team vanished. The organization who sent them there was unable to find any of the men. At 5 a.m., just before dawn, the team left their hotel rooms, taking only a few clothes and other necessities with them. They left a note in which they thanked the Germans for their hospitality. "We are going to France," it said. In reality, they were going to Italy. "We knew from our relatives and friends that once we got to Italy, we couldn't be sent back," Chandana said. "Italians are very friendly, and they like us to work in their restaurants. Sri Lankan Italians have no problems with the police. We are not involved in any substances or other criminal activities." The founder said, "We initially thought the team had got lost in nearby woods while jogging. That's when they found the note. Even though it said they were going to France, they knew the men had crossed into Italy. The men had even left their dirty laundry in the hotel room. The media immediately started asking about the disappearing act. Was the handball team full of terrorists who were smuggled into Germany?" When the media called the Ministry of Sports of Sri Lanka, they said that handball is rarely played in Sri Lanka. The formation of a national team was a mystery. They don't even have a club. The founder of the Asian German Sports Exchange Program was extremely disappointed by the incident. "This is the last time we will invite any more teams from Sri Lanka." He couldn't even if he wanted to, because right after the event, the Germany embassy blacklisted the exchange program from participating in the country's sporting events again. After that, no team got a visa. He said that's the sad part of the whole thing. Meanwhile, the players' family members were facing terrible financial consequences back at home, as the men had pawned their assets to fund their plan, saying they would send back money. The men had come up with their plan far in advance. They formed the handball team just to obtain legal visas to Germany. Within a decade, more than half of Sri Lanka's 23 handball players had returned home. "I came back after 6 months," says Chandana. "My child was homesick. I felt homesick. I couldn't find a job, even though I promised." He wrote to the founder of the exchange program for forgiveness. One player worked as a pizza maker in a pizzeria for 4 years before returning to Sri Lanka. During those 4 years, he earned a lot of money and regularly sent part of his salary back to his family in Sri Lanka. He received a call from an old friend who had a similar plan for him to legally join his relatives in Italy. His friend asked him, "Have you ever heard of a game called handball?" His relative ended up in Italy hiding in a shipping container, but he heard of others who passed of suffocation on a similar trip. He knew his parents wouldn't allow him to make such a dangerous attempt to leave the country, but like Chandana, he wanted to legally leave the country with a visa he got while playing handball. Although he was bitter at first, even considering suing every team member because they made him look like a fool, the founder began to understand over the years why the players did what they did. It was out of necessity. All the men on the team supported an average of 5 to 10 family members in Sri Lanka, and each of those players sent money back to their families every month. Sometime in the mid to late 20th century, around 1962, Nancy Evans Bush lay in a hospital bed screaming in pain as she gave birth to her second child. Suddenly, something strange happened. Maybe it was relaxing at first, albeit little unsettling. She felt her soul separate from her body, but any curiosity she may have had about the experience quickly left and was replaced by utter fear as her consciousness retreated into endless darkness at a tremendous speed. Nancy's soul flew higher and higher up and out from the roof until she could see over the hospital. She rose so high that she could see nothing but senseless black void around her. Still in complete shock and fear, she soon noticed circular creatures hovering around her. They kept changing color, clicking from white to black and back again. Although she thought they were heartless and malicious, she was careful to not say they were evil. They seemed authoritative. It was clear to her that they controlled the unknown environment around her and knew much more than she did. Despite her Christian faith, it never occurred to her what she saw could be hell. She just automatically assumed that it was what awaited her after passing, without giving any religious significance. The creatures began to speak, and what they had to say was truly terrifying. They told her that she never existed. Her 17-month-old daughter had never existed. Her mother never existed. The earth wasn't real. It had all been a joke. She had the feeling that what the circular entities were telling her was undeniably true, and there was no point in arguing. Completely devastated, she listened in silence as the creatures told her none of it had ever been real. This is all there is. Eventually, the entities disappeared, leaving her alone in the endless darkness that surrounded her. She had no context to understanding this new revelation. Her father and grandfather were intellectual and liberal Christians, and she was taught that Jesus loves everyone and that if you do the right thing, you will go to heaven. That experience ate away at that belief. In her later research on near-death experiences, she concluded that bad things often happen to people she considered bad. The unfaithful, the guilty, the hateful. She was born again, and while she admitted that she was far from perfect, there was nothing in her background to suggest that she deserved such a hellish fate. When she was revived, her soul returned to her body, and her first thought was that what she had been told was true. Predeterminism was real, and she was born to suffer. The truth about the virtual nature of the world weighed heavily on her. She felt too terrible to tell anyone. 6 months after the experience, she began to recover when she was drinking tea with a friend. Her friend handed her a book they had just bought that day, Jung's Man and His Symbols, and told her to look through it. She did, but soon dropped it and stumbled away from the table in horror. There, on the left of one of the pages, was a large image of one of the entities she saw in her dream. Only later did she realize that she was looking at the yin-yang symbol known from ancient Chinese philosophy. She had not been exposed to the concept before, having been raised in a Christian household. It was this strange realization that led her to join the International Association for Near-Death Studies and became an advocate for those who had suffered unpleasant near-death experiences with overwhelmingly positive New Age perspective. This sounds like a DMT trip.